Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of CME Palooza Spring. I am Scott Kober, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza, and I would like to welcome you to this session entitled Two Sides of the Same Coin, Provider and Commercial Supporter Perspectives on Common Challenges and Opportunities in Industry-Supported CME. This session is sponsored by DKB Med. Our moderator for this session is Andrea Funk. Andrea is the General Manager of Global Education Group, and she'll be introducing the rest of the panelists here shortly. But before we do that, as we do with all of our sessions, I would like to start by thanking our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Haymarket Medical Education, Med Learning Group, Projects in Knowledge, our silver sponsors, Academic CME, Clinical Education Alliance, Daiichi Sankyo, DKB Med, Helio CME, Integrity Continuing Education, Medscape Education, Platform Q Health Education, and Talem Health. Our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, AxDev, Bonum Continuing Education, CMEology, Excalibur Medical Education, GibLib, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, Integritas Communications, Iridium Continuing Education. Did I get that right, Michelle?
Melissa, but yes.
Or Melissa. Every time I'm like, I think I might have gotten it wrong. But anyway, Leading Learning, MedIQ, Partners for Advancing Clinical Education, Paradigm Medical Communications, PriMed, Peerview Institute for Medical Education, Vindico Medical Education, and Wright Medicine. So there are two ways to ask questions during this and all of our CME Palooza sessions. You can use the Horizon CME text line to send in a question. The number is 267-666-0CME, that's 0263. Or if you want to open up the viewing window in YouTube, you could enter in questions directly within the YouTube chat function. We will get to as many questions as we can throughout today's session. So we'll be using ARS questions at the beginning of the session, a little different way than we do for some of our other sessions as well. So hopefully this will work out well. So hopefully by now you have downloaded the Poll Everywhere app and you can join the presentation entitled CME Palooza 005, or you can type in the following URL in your web browser, www.pollev.com/CME Palooza 005. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Andrea to introduce our panel and get this session started.
Thank you so much, Scott. We have a great panel for everybody this afternoon, starting with Melissa Wiles, who I will let introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Melissa Wiles. Very happy to be here. So thanks for having me. I'm the president of Iridium Continuing Education.
And we also have Amanda.
Hi, I am happy to be here. My name is Amanda Kozerski. I am the director of MedEd grants for hematology at Johnson & Johnson.
Everybody's favorite, Annette, is also with us today.
Wow, well, thank you for that. Hi, I'm Annette Schwind, and I'm an associate director for medical grants and sponsorships at Takeda, currently supporting the GI therapeutic area.
And I'm excited to also welcome Mark Morgan.
Hey everyone, thanks guys again for having me. Mark Morgan, Associate Director for Global Medical Education, focusing on the cardiovascular space.
We do have a disclosure slide. As you can see, Mark Morgan is a paid employee of BMS. This presentation is intended for informational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. This presentation is not intended to provide medical or legal advice. Statements of fact, positions taken, and opinions expressed are those of the speaker individually, and unless expressly stated to the contrary, do not necessarily reflect the opinion or position of the speaker's employer, BMS, or any of its subsidiaries and or related entities. Annette Schwind is an employee of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Amanda Kozerski is an employee of Johnson & Johnson. Myself and Melissa both have nothing to disclose. The views expressed in this session are those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent the perspective of the employers, institutions, or organizations which the presenters are affiliated. Examples are for illustrative purposes only, intended to facilitate discussion around processes and best practices. None of the information provided implies positive funding decision from pharmaceutical companies or any other funding organizations. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our ARS. The purpose of this is to kind of gauge our audience and see what kind of, what your feelings are on some of these things, what kind of questions you might have to kind of direct the process of this presentation. So for my providers, being my MECs, universities, healthcare facilities, in 1 to 2 words, what are major pain points you experience in seeking funding from industry? And I understand it's very difficult to pick 1 or 2 words, but this will end up like a word cloud, so hopefully it'll make more sense. Oh, I like that. I think word clouds are fun.
Yeah.
So we've got definitions or problems, budgets, areas of fundings, creating grants, deliverables, marketing.
Accreditation.
I wonder if unicorn is a standalone word or.
Yeah, let's start with a unicorn request.
Right? Unicorn budgets, maybe. That's
I was
weird.
going to say, if there's a budget unicorn out there, I really just want to see it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. That definitely helps us kind of understand what we're looking at. These are definitely some things in this presentation that we want to see if we can help address or at least have a discussion around, just to kind of have that community and understand where everybody's at. Can we do the next? Thank you. Now, for the funders who are on the call, the commercial supporters, in 1 to 2 words, what are major pain points you experience in receiving funding requests from providers? And again, I'm sure it's hard to narrow it down to 1 to 2 words. But we got unicorn, so clearly we can do this.
I was just hoping for another unicorn.
We get Tyrannosaurus. Can somebody quickly spell Tyrannosaurus? Many requests, limited budgets.
T-Rex, nice.
Abbreviated T-Rex. That's okay. We'll accept that.
All right, so it looks like it's incomplete requests, limited budget, many requests.
All right. Whoever spelled Tyrannosaurus, you win. You win the internet today.
That's correct.
Perfect. We're going to go ahead, I guess, and go on to the next one quickly. For providers, in 1 to 2 words, what are major pain points you experience when receiving feedback on your grant requests? Same. Ghosting, same.
Getting ghosted.
Cost per learner, I saw. Limitation, feedback timing, vague. I think we've seen some vague ones before personally. Great. It's a good word cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Just one more survey question for our friends who are following us today. For funders, in 1 or 2 words, what are major pain points in provider expectations for receiving feedback? Request color. Don't know if I understand color.
No, I don't either.
Time, requests. Details. Many requests. Makes sense. I think that gives us a good idea as to kind of where everybody's coming from, which I think will continue to help with our presentation. So we wanted to kind of go over some case scenarios, and then we're going to have Amanda and Melissa are representing our provider team today, and Mark and Annette are representing our supporter team today. In their experience over the past many years in this area, we figured, or each area respectively, we figured this was a nice little panelist to go back and forth with on kind of the same case scenarios to see if we could understand where each side of the coin, if you will, is coming from. So we created a totally hypothetical case scenarios. Again, none of these are intended to be representative of any one or specific case that occurred. So in our first case scenario, we wanted to address resource realities. We have a company called Really Good CME, and they're seeking multi-support for a CME program. The program is going to include a live symposium and enduring material. The topic is serotonin syndrome. Serotonin syndrome is extreme deficiency of serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter regulating mood, sleep, appetite. Symptoms include uncontrollable laughter, craving for pickles, and spontaneous dance. And the target audience for our activity is going to be neurologists. So the program aims to educate on diagnosis, treatment, and management for our neurology team. Hey, providers. So I wanted to ask you some questions. So this is going to be for Melissa and Amanda. What challenges might the provider have with this program in terms of multi-support?
So
go ahead, Melissa. No, you go ahead.
Everybody all at once.
I'm not sure how big the therapeutic area is for serotonin syndrome. So I always, when multi-support comes into play, the first question is how many potential commercial supporters are there? And from, there we whittle down and we think about, okay, where are the other players in the product's life cycle? And how do you align how much money could you potentially seek from each supporter given where they are in their life cycle? And then there's always the fun thought of what are the common themes or objectives or where the various therapeutic categories overlap so that both commercial supporters would be strategically aligned in terms of, topics and things that they would want to talk about in a CME program that was funded. So those are some of the things that go through my mind. And then there are other considerations are really just coordinating the timing of funding based on the various budgetary cycles.
I think Melissa nailed them. That is exactly, what I would say too. I think the challenge that is, once you identify if there's other funders, is going to be that timeline. Everyone's on their own timeline and their own model for approving grants. So then as a provider, our original timeline really can get shut out of the park very quickly. So that becomes even more work really for both sides as, you start getting approvals in, and then there's an organization that's, holding onto the grant for whatever reason. And one supporter is asking for, well, do we have an estimated timeline? Is there a new, is there a change of scope with a new date? Well, we don't have that date yet. So the practicality of actually putting through, creating the proposal is one thing, because it is a challenge to identify exactly how much content needs to be addressed for the program and to be of interest to the clinicians. If it's serotonin, it seems like it's a very targeted and very specific area. But if the others who are potentially interested in this space don't have as much interest in serotonin and maybe more on a little serotonin, it comes down to, well, how do we create content that's going to be still of interest to the target audience? That's what we're trying to do, and still meet the needs of our supporters.
Makes sense. In a grant request like this, how would you determine how much you would ask for and why? And then if you could piggyback on that, what are you going to do if you only get partial support, like 75% of funding, 90% of funding, something like that?
I always like to go in with, a 50% request. And I think even if you have 4 or 5 supporters, if you go in at 50%, and you get 2 approved, then it's a win. Now you're whole. I think you never know what's going to come through as approval. So if you were to have 4 supporters and say, I'm just going to ask 25% from everybody, then you really run the risk going into it at a shortfall. So in my mind, I think 50% makes sense. But you can also argue that, company A that has the most interest in serotonin should, be more interested in the program. So they might want to support more. And I think that's when it comes down to really understanding the space and understanding the supporters who are in that space.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is just looking at sort of a contingency plan. If you don't get full support, how would you be, if you were to get 50%, would you be able to maintain the integrity of what you intended to accomplish with if you had to sharpen your pencil? So that contingency plan may be well thought out, and put that in the grant would definitely help supporters as they evaluate proposals.
And what do you think the best ways are to keep all interested parties informed of decisions? Like, what do you do, Melissa, to make sure everybody's on the same page? Or what do you think the best practice is?
Yeah, so I do a lot of monthly reporting. So at the beginning of each month, I try to not only update on programs that that are currently in implementation, but then also anything that's outlying with multi-support, just a quick email that says, here's who we've heard back from, here's who we're waiting on, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to update any grant that's in queue, that's multi-supported, and let the grant manager or the decision makers know the status of what's going on. So I don't know if it needs to be on a monthly basis, but if a grant's been partially approved by one organization, then definitely the other organizations should be made aware that partial support has been secured. And that would either impact timelines and whatever else that may be impacted by that.
Great. Let's go ahead and hear from our commercial supporter side of things. Annette and Mark, how do you determine how much you should contribute to a multi-support initiative?
Annette, feel free to start.
All right, thanks. So when I'm discussing multi-support opportunities with the grant review committee, one of the most common questions is, well, if they have 5 potential supporters, why are they asking us for 50%? And quite often I have to do a little bit of education, put my provider hat back on and explain the different reasons why they may be asking for more, pointing out this is aimed at a specific audience and not every other supporter has the same commitment or interest to this audience that we might. But a lot of the decision comes down to one, what does our budget look like overall and for that tactic? So the particular case study here was for a live symposium and an enduring. How much did we put aside for live symposia at whatever conference this is going to be at? And then also, if there's information in the proposal about those contingency plans, at what level can we still get that live symposium and some sort of enduring? At what level would it just be the live symposium? And we do take all of that into consideration, as well as, at least for Takeda, knowing that we are on a Japanese fiscal calendar, meaning our fiscal year started in April. So if I'm seeing something in April, 1 or 2 of the other supporters have already seen this. It went in January because that was the beginning of their fiscal year. And I try to factor that in and help my grant review committee take that into account too, that we may be the last people they're waiting for. So that's kind of the alchemy of multi-support funding.
Yeah, great answer. And honestly, I feel like we really focus on how much we should contribute based off of how much it's really aligned to our strategy. And so if the actual grant is not really that aligned, well then, or let's say it's like a track at a particular Congress, and there's 10 programs, and only one of them is, strategically aligned, then maybe I will give in that 10 to 20% ballpark arc, and I think that that's fair. I feel like that ultimately really kind of dictates how I focus on these multi-support initiatives. Sometimes I also evaluate key aspects that I feel like are valuable. So it's not just alignment, but like, okay, well, how many people will be attending such a thing? So I think that also really helps us focus. There's just the general things throughout a grant review that we'll do with pretty much any grant. But I think that's really that key component is what percentage of it is aligned.
And to piggyback on that, Mark, are you more likely to contribute to a program that already has funding? Like, with you in your position, is that something of interest, or does it not make a difference one way or the other? It's truly the alignment with the therapeutic area.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely alignment, right? First and foremost, right? If the alignment's not there, the actual logic for funding is not really there. But there is, not a more increased likelihood to support a program, but rather an assurance that the program will occur as they said it was going to occur, or that I appreciate. Hey, when I know that there's funding on board. So I think that kind of helps answer that question. Annette?
I would agree that alignment is first and foremost. Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, sorry. I think there must be a delay. I just asked if you had anything to add, but you were going. My bad.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just agreeing with Mark that alignment is first and foremost, because even if there is support for a program and it doesn't align, then it's not a good use of my budget. But knowing that there is support for a multi-support, if I had two programs that were equally aligned, equally well-designed and engaging, and everything else being comparable, then the fact that I might not have to give as much to one is definitely something in its favor. Now, I don't know that I would say that if both were equal, one had multi-support, but I still had to give the same amount, then that really would come down to which one do I really feel is best designed and will accomplish goals that are aligned with mine.
And how do you feel like providers can most effectively communicate to the external stakeholders? I know Melissa and Amanda had said, some monthly reports, some reports based on decision making. What do you look for when you're looking for that communication as a best practice?
Just communicate, please. Don't make me chase you.
Right.
Hey, so have you gotten any more support? And it's okay if the answer is no, or just still waiting. But if it's a monthly cadence, that's fine. But please tell me, or as soon as you hear, gosh, we didn't get this support, so we're going to work on what that would look like. That's fine. Keep me in the know, but please don't keep me waiting for months and months. And then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we never got any support. So now we're going to change scope. And I'm like, oh, you were supposed to launch next month. Guess you're not. Yeah.
No, 100%. And it's super frustrating. And if the program is supposed to launch and you don't have funding on board for what you said you would have to have, and if the program doesn't launch on time, honestly, it really does get underneath our skin. So I think that really just keeping us up to date and informed, I don't think that the urgency with these IMEs, given a couple of days, really doesn't change things, but just keeping us informed does change things.
That's great. I appreciate that. I think that actually really kind of nicely segues us to our next case scenario on transparency of grant denials. So in this example, a really good CME company is going to submit a grant request, again, a live and enduring component on serotonin syndrome. The efforts to secure funding have been unsuccessful, declined by several potential supporters, and now really good CME kind of wants to understand why they got the grant rejection. From our providers, Melissa, under what circumstances do you think that you should seek feedback from a commercial supporter?
This is a really hard question because this never happened before. I kid you. No, I really try to understand that the nature of grant applications are very competitive. And so I think, and I also try to understand that commercial supporters' times are limited. It is not feasible for them to provide feedback on every grant that is declined. But having said that, there are some that sting more than others, or some that I really truly believe in the design was really in alignment with the target audience. And I maybe uncovered some needs that I didn't think were just in the literature. So situations where you thought that it was really kind of a spot on grant, those are the kinds of ones that I might seek some information for. How about you, Amanda?
Yeah, no, I agree. I wouldn't seek feedback for all of my proposals when I submitted them. I think, especially now, understanding what the other side is like, it would just be unfair to expect feedback on all of them. I do think that sometimes when it was an RFP, I might, choose those in particular to seek feedback for. Sometimes, when it's an RFP and they're clearly looking for grants and then they decline, sometimes they might be more receptive to providing feedback. I would never expect to get feedback. Anytime I requested feedback, I think it was always a 50-50 chance, that you would receive feedback. And for me, I think the value in the feedback was just to understand, were we close? Was our content, okay? Was the innovative format innovative enough? Anything like that is what I would be interested in hearing. And then also was always, where were we with the budget? As a provider, it's always a struggle to, find out you guys were proposing the same program or similar programs, and someone else was going to have 3,000 participants compared to your 1,000 participants. So that sometimes that kind of feedback was interesting to hear and helpful in planning.
And what kind of feedback have you been provided in the past, and how did that impact your future grant submission process? Do you have an example without naming names? Melissa, absolutely. If you do too, feel free to jump in.
Yeah. I mean, I think the feedback I've been provided in the past was with budget alignment. As Amanda said, maybe the priority wasn't primary care. Maybe it was a specialty audience. So that's always good to know if there isn't anything like on their website that tells you that. So I've been told that before. And then sometimes it's just grant timing. Like I just funded a similar program, so I wasn't able to even consider yours. So those kind of things are very helpful to know, or we don't even fund those types of programs anymore. That's always helpful too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the kind of feedback I remember getting as well. I think budgets was always the easiest one and most frequent I would hear back on. And I think the audience, making sure that you're either, casting a wide umbrella, or if you're looking for a specific audience. I remember getting feedback on sometimes, that's where they went with a different group. Either, someone was casting a bigger net or someone was a little bit more targeted. But I agree. Anything like that is just helpful for future proposals. but you also kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, knowing that this is a real cyclical process, and things change as a provider and a supporter. And as disease states continue to, as more science comes out and as information changes, then supporters' interests change and opportunities change. So I always welcomed any feedback I could get my hands on, but at the same time, I didn't make sure that my next proposal was going to be exactly what my other one wasn't, because it's just, that's not really how it works. There's always a change in one side or the other of that coin.
Mm-hmm.
And have either of you ever received feedback that you thought was unhelpful? And can you elaborate, if you did, why you felt it was unhelpful, or to what degree it was not helpful to you?
I think the only feedback that is not helpful is when it's just not very specific. It's just sort of that blanket approach and, meant to respond but not provide any information. At the same time, I do understand that every commercial supporter has guidelines on what they are and are not allowed to communicate. So I do respect that when I get it.
Yeah, I think those generic emails that, your grant was not selected at this time, those are the most frustrating, or, your grant did not score high enough. It would be nice to know, well, where did I score in the middle? Yeah. What was my score? Where were the low points? But I agree. I agree completely with what Melissa said. And again, now knowing the other side, that's just too much, too hard, not possible half the time.
Absolutely. I'd like to turn it over to our supporters with a couple questions, with the understanding that all commercial supporters have different regulations. Generally speaking, what type of feedback are you not allowed to provide typically? Like, what would you think would be a blanket type of feedback that is not okay? Annette, do you want to take a swing at it?
Wow, it's a little hard to say blanket anything, just because there are such different, I absolutely resonate with the word cloud that was generated and saying the vague, and both Melissa and Amanda spoke to that. Couple things would like to understand, those vague responses that come out, they usually get auto-generated from whatever grant system. Those are the statements that have been approved by our compliance and our legal departments. So people who know nothing about CME are the ones making decisions about what can go in those statements from a risk point of view. They're making sure we don't put anything out there that's going to put the company at risk from a legal or a compliance standpoint. I will also say that certainly written communications carry a certain level of restriction that perhaps verbal communications would not. And so I would imagine that in general, the type of feedback like, anything that's too specific. You were right on target with our educational strategy, but we don't have budget. Well, oops, I just went a little bit too far there because I indicated what my educational strategy is, which is not something that should be communicated outside. So it might be easier to say the type of feedback, like if something is, this was declined due to lack of budget, that I could probably tell you in writing. Or something that, I have seen decline, let us say, was not strategically aligned. They're able to go that far, but not into specifics. So yeah, any type of specific information I can imagine would be very difficult to communicate in writing for any supporter.
Yeah, and I would echo that highly. I feel like the specifics and the communication written generally being not really what we're kind of providing feedback on. And then I think like sometimes people will bring up their slides or their power proposals and be like, okay, let's go through it in detail. What about this objective and this objective? I'm like, no. We're not doing this. And that kind of specifics is not appropriate and not done.
So Mark and Annette, I've got a question that came in on our Horizon CME text line. Okay, question is, what if in the proposal there are factual errors? Is that the sort of feedback that you are able to provide to a potential provider?
If the science is incorrect?
I think so. If the science in the proposal is incorrect.
I mean, if the science is incorrect, I feel like I would definitely feel like okay to discuss that, because I feel like that's definitely on the phone. I'd be like, well, this is scientifically inaccurate. If you're mentioning something that's false, I think that's especially if it's like a incorrectly like citing of an inappropriate source or guideline. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. That would be a phone conversation for sure, but definitely pointing out, and hopefully it was just some sort of misunderstanding, or it happens. You reuse a previous needs assessment or something, and you didn't switch out everything you should have. Yeah, but those are also the sorts of things that would really hope providers are paying special attention to, knowing how competitive this is. And something like that is certainly not going to be something we can support.
Sorry, go ahead. Did you have something to add?
No, that's all.
Can either of you share how you decide on which providers you can provide or you will provide feedback to?
Sometimes it's just luck of the draw. If an email comes and I have some time, maybe I'll jump on a phone call. Sometimes I won't. I mean, honestly, there's just I feel like some people are repeat offenders that always want feedback, and those people will on the second or third feedback conversation will not be provided feedback.
I would have to say, if someone reaches out to me and says, hey, can we connect? I will do my best to get back to you and say, yes, I've got 15 minutes. Please know that I am doing my best and I can't drop everything to connect. I have had some providers who are rather aggressive and they want to meet, this week. And I say, you know what, this week I'm slammed. I have some time on this day. Oh, well, we'd really like to meet before that. And that's when I start saying, well, that's great, but I can't. And if you push it anymore, that's not nice. So hopefully some understanding there, knowing that I will provide. And like Mark said, if you're getting similar feedback from me once, twice, 3 times, then maybe it's not worth having a conversation, because clearly either you're not able to incorporate that feedback for whatever reason, or you just don't want to. But it's not worth either of our time to have the same conversation over and over.
That makes sense. Mark, anything else to add?
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah, I get it. It's not you, it's me sort of scenario. So we're going to go through one more case scenario that we've got beyond the LOA, strategic execution and impactful reporting. So we have a program funded by multiple commercial supporters. The program is running late. An interim launch report reveals significant deviation from the intended audience. So an overwhelming number are from primary care instead of we were hoping for specialists. We're going to take it to our provider team and ask, hey, Melissa, what goes through your mind when these scenarios what goes through your mind rather in these scenarios from a program management perspective?
Yeah, I think that it always makes you feel uncomfortable when you're looking at the numbers and you see this deviation, or when you're running late, even if there is a good reason for it. So I think the earlier the notification that you can assure the commercial supporter that you have noticed something in the program, or maybe it's faculty that can't connect that is causing the program to be delayed. What information do you need to file so that their system is updated? Just being very proactive, providing those detailed updates, and letting them know that your team is working on whatever problems it is, coming up with solutions to address. We're reaching out to different audience generation partners and all of the things that you're doing, so that you can deliver on what was outlined on something that a grant request. And then just really is we all try to close the loop and think about the circle in medical education. What did we learn from that, and how do we prevent that in the future? I think is always important.
I think building on that, everything that Melissa said, yes, I agree. And I think also what is interesting to dig into a little bit more in these scenarios is that audience. Maybe, digging into why is the primary care audience participating? Are they actually interested? So trying to understand more rationale for why that audience is there. And then once you have an answer, being able to share that insight with your supporters. I'm not trying to hide anything. We are going to keep pursuing, alternative recruitment methods for the, primary audience, whichever it was. But the primary care piece here is really interesting. I think it's shedding a lot of light on this program and on the needs and practice patterns. So I think, I wouldn't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think it's really important to understand why those clinicians are participating and get a handle on practice patterns and perhaps, future educational opportunities.
At what point or how would you update the commercial supporter? What's a best practice methodology for kind of giving them that news? It's not necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily great either, since you kind of missed the audience that you had originally guaranteed.
Yeah, I would tell them along the way, if you've already told them that you missed your deadline. So, that hard conversation has already been had. So I think what I would do is, once the data starts coming in and you're seeing that the PCPs are participating a little bit more, you have your internal teams do whatever they're going to do to get the oncologist or the neurologist, whoever our audience is, up. So once you already have a plan in place, then I would go back to the supporter and say, this is what we're seeing. Don't worry. We have corrected, we've adjusted, and this is what we're doing to get the oncologist, the neurologist, the cardiologist, whoever it is, to our program. And this is what we're going to do now in the next couple of months, is understand why the PCPs are participating in the manner that they're participating. So then it gives me a point to follow up on in a couple months, once we have our homework done and get an understanding of why it's going on. And if it is just this platform really wasn't the platform for the specialist, it really is a PCP heavy program, then we understand that and have that conversation. But we've already corrected the problem because we're using another distribution channel to help with our numbers.
That was actually going to lead into the next question. Like, what would be an example of what you would do to positively impact this learner mix? Melissa, do you have anything on that note?
I think it's just a matter of looking at different audience generation partners and who might be able to help out. And are there different ways to get to that target audience? So.
And the last question for our providers on this particular case, how much is too much reporting from an internal resource perspective? I know it's a totally loaded question, right?
Yeah, and I think it's one that's worth looking at from the provider side. I think NAMIC did a survey this year, and it was, I think, somewhere around 40% of medical education companies have less than 10 people. And so when you start looking at multi-support and reporting and everyone having their own template, and I am all for delivering outcomes and basically providing information and updates for our programs and showing the value of it. But I think it does get to a point where it can be burdensome, right? Especially when, as we were talking about, the administrative burden with all of the multi-support things and that kind of things that come into play. And, as I sort of troubleshoot and try to think about like proactive, and I look at the bubble cloud and where is the frustration and, the grant submissions and developing the grants. And, I had once done an activity where it cost no less than $5,000 to develop and submit a grant from a timing perspective and enter a grant. So if we think about commercial supporters, every time that they do an RFP, every time they hit that button, that's a $5,000 hit to the company's bare minimum, right, across the board. And as an industry, I shake my head and just say, well, how could we be using this money to educate doctors, to impact patient outcomes, to be able to provide those reports? So I feel like I want to challenge the industry to really figure out how can we streamline this grant process so we're more efficient. So
that's the $1 million, target right there, right?
Yeah.
I agree completely. Multi-funded, outcomes reporting was a beast. Will bring anyone to tears because of all of the pieces that Melissa laid out. I think I'm going to put my provider hat on real quick and say, what I would suggest to people, and if the organization if one of the supporters that provided funds for the grant doesn't have the monthly or quarterly, requirement, what I would ask of the providers who did receive a grant was, if you're doing a report for company X, just copy me, send it to me. You can take their logo off if you want to, although I already know that they're a partial supporter anyway. So you can use their template, but just send it to me, because for me as a supporter, it was real important to see something. Some organizations aren't requesting outcomes reports. So you have a handful of companies that are requesting monthly, dare I say monthly reports. Some are quarterly. And then you have others that are going to wait until the end. So as a provider, it's trying to juggle those monthly reports with the ones that aren't requiring anything, and knowing that that company who's not requiring anything should really see some of this data, It's trying to balance that from a time commitment is a challenge, because now you're trying to meet those requirements on the monthly basis, but then almost kind of make it more work for yourself to give it to the other provider or the other supporter who's not looking for it. I think from a provider perspective, to me, it was always do more, provide more. If that other company isn't going to look at it, it's no skin off. Well, a little skin off my back. But I'd rather at least know that this is what we're doing for the other company. They have it. I'm just going to send it your way too, so you can see it.
Awesome. I'd like to turn it over and talk to our supporters. In this scenario, and again, the scenario being multi-supported, program running late, interim outcomes reveals that we've got the wrong audience that's participating. What would you expect from the provider as far as communication, and what would you expect as far as perhaps action items?
And then I want to kind of take this one. Actually, I really, really have a pet peeve on pacing providers. It does not bode well for you guys if there's like no communication, a submission of we told you 3,000 learners and there's 100 learners in 90 days. So and I guess the expectation is deal with it. I guess I don't know what the thought process behind that is, and I think that there's not a desire to at least explain what's going on. How did this happen? What happened? What went down? What is, if anything, are you going to do about it? I think that that's something that ultimately helps us. Like, okay, well, this is what happened. This is how they dealt with it. this is how they're dealing with it. We'll take a look and see in a couple of months what's going on. And I think that really does help from our perspective, evaluate the grants and the outcomes of the provider.
And I would agree. Communicate. Tell me you're running late. Okay, I understand. Faculty couldn't get together, or things happen that throw things off. If I know, then I can do things on my end if I need to set expectations. Around the audience, I 100% agree that, as Amanda said, don't necessarily jump to it's wrong. So far, what you're seeing is it's different than you expected. So remind me what you expected as far as specialists versus PCPs. How many you have is of each, because maybe the number of specialists is what you were expecting at this point, but the number of PCPs was overwhelmingly more. So the ratio seems off, but that's interesting. That's a why. And that you would continue to market to the specialists because they are on track. Now, if we have very few specialists, but PCPs, just like blew up the activity, then yes, what are you going to do about it? As Mark said, just tell me what you're doing about it so that I know, and again, can set expectations internally. So yeah, those would very good ideas. And I love what Amanda said about, hey, if you're producing information and communication for one set of folks in a multi-support, just repurpose it. I might not have asked for it, but hey, if I don't have time to look at it, it gets filed until I do. Or, oh, this is good information and I can keep my team updated as well.
So I have another question that came in on the Horizon CME text line that kind of relates to this question. Okay, here's the question for you. What about communication expectations from supporters after they receive outcomes reports? We have many times submitted outcomes reports that seem to go into a black hole, and we never receive any feedback on the reports themselves.
I think that, for the most part, I feel like we like to kind of at least say review them, or say that we reviewed them, and we do look at these outcomes in great detail here at BMS, as we evaluate them in significant with significant scrutiny, and then we ultimately take those insights and bring them to our medical teams. So sometimes I guess maybe they're not being communicated, they're being reviewed, but they're definitely being reviewed. Yeah, that's all I got. Annette?
Yeah, I would echo that. I review every outcomes report that comes in. I use them in different ways. Sometimes it's spotlighting that particular program. Sometimes I'm rolling it up with other related programs that are achieving a certain goal that we had in our med-ed strategy. I'd love to hear more about what type of feedback would you like, or are you expecting, given that the outcomes report is very similar to your budget reconciliation. You got to do one. And I'm not going to call everybody and say, great job on that budget recon. You guys filled that out great. But if there are times when something's especially intriguing, or maybe I need help interpreting some of the outcomes, then I will reach out and say, oh, I'm going to present this. Can you provide this chart for me? Or even on one occasion, I've had the provider come in and present the outcomes in more detail. So I guess I'd like to understand more about what type of communication would be better than the assumption that your outcomes are being read and used appropriately as we see fit.
And it's disappointing though, Annette, that when you see a reconciliation that they reconcile the travel to the penny, that you don't reach back out and say that's a fantastic reconciliation.
At least a gold star, right? Like, I mean, that totally warrants a gold star.
You know, I think next time I get to suggest an update to our portal, putting in some sort of gold star or, emoji that floats up, I think that would be fantastic. I would be like pressing that button every time.
Okay. Well, great. I know that we're running up against time. I know that one of our panelists has to quickly do a costume change for her next session. So for everyone who is watching this session, either the live version or the recorded version, we do have a brief CME Palooza Spring survey that we use to gauge who's watching and then to help us plan future iterations of CME Palooza. So please fill that out. And to view the next session, just look on our live page and click the appropriate session link. It will start here in about 4 minutes. This is our Ted Lasso session. So this session should be interesting. So with that, I would like to thank Andrea. I would like to thank Amanda. I would like to thank Melissa, not Michelle. I would like to thank Mark, and I would like to thank Annette for joining us and everybody for watching, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we're out. All right.